I was standing in my quiet kitchen, sunlight spilling across the tile floor, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something nudged me, intuition perhaps, or the faint recognition that trouble rarely knocks politely. "Is this Ms. Helen Avery?" a stern male voice asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "This is Officer Granger with the County Fraud Unit. We have some questions about a mortgage application submitted last week. It appears your information was used without your consent." My heartbeat stuttered. "I haven't applied for anything." "That's what we suspected," he continued. "The applicant listed your former address as their primary residence. Your name was included on the paperwork. We need to verify whether you authorized any of this." I sank into a chair. My old address. My name. A loan application. There was only one person reckless enough, and arrogant enough, to believe he could involve me in his financial mess and get away with it. My ex-husband, Mark. The same man who once stood in the ruins of our marriage and sneered, "You can't survive without me, Helen. You never could." For 3 years, I'd built myself back up after our divorce. Piece by piece, quietly and stubbornly. I'd learned to breathe again, to budget again, to find comfort in my own company. I'd let the bitterness fade like a bruise. But hearing that officer's voice snapped everything back into sharp focus. I asked him to repeat every detail. He did, carefully and methodically. When he read the address aloud, I closed my eyes. Yes. That was the house Mark and I once shared. The house he kept in the divorce. The house he told me I was too sentimental to deserve. "When can we meet?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he replied. I hung up and stared out the window, watching a blue jay hop along the fence. My hands were trembling. Not from fear, but recognition. Because deep down, I knew what this meant. Mark hadn't changed. He still believed he could use me, legally or emotionally. He still believed I was the fragile woman who once tiptoed around his temper. He still believed I'd be too scared, or too loyal, to fight back. But he had made a mistake. He'd forgotten who I'd become in the years since I walked away from him. He'd forgotten the quiet strength that had grown in the empty spaces he left behind. And as the realization settled in my chest, a calm came over me. Cool, steady, immovable. If he wanted a reminder of the woman he underestimated, he was about to get one. Because what the officer said next, just before we hung up, changed everything. "Ma'am, there's something else on the application you're going to want to see." I looked at the clock. Morning suddenly felt a lifetime away. And for the first time in years, I whispered something I hadn't dared to say out loud. "This time, Mark, you messed with the wrong woman." But nothing could have prepared me for what was waiting in that file. Because what the officer revealed the next morning would expose a betrayal far deeper than a forged loan application, and drag me into a fight I never asked for, but was more than ready to finish. My name is Helen Avery, and as of last spring, I turned 63 years old. I mention my age because people often assume that women my age are supposed to shrink their world, not expand it. We're expected to knit quietly, mind our gardens, stay out of trouble, and certainly stay out of conflict. But I've lived long enough to know that trouble comes whether you invite it or not. And conflict, ethical, necessary conflict, has a way of finding you when someone believes you're too tired or too gentle to fight back. It's strange, looking back now, how simple my days had become. After the divorce, I bought a small townhouse on the edge of town. I filled it with soft lamps, warm blankets, and the quiet I'd been starved of for years. I worked part-time at the library, tended to my roses, and met with a group of women every Thursday for tea and conversation that always managed to land somewhere between wisdom and laughter. Life wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful, predictable, mine. And if you'd asked me 6 months ago whether I thought my ex-husband would ever find his way back into my life, even by accident, I would have laughed and said no. We'd divorced cleanly, or so I believed. I'd walked away with my half of the savings, a quiet dignity he never understood, and a determination to rebuild without bitterness. Mark stayed in the old house. A charming two-story he believed he deserved more than I did. He filled it with expensive furniture, hosted loud parties, dated women who were always fun, but never stayed long. He liked to be seen, admired, envied. That was always his way. And I was content to let him have that life, as long as it stayed far away from mine. But that phone call proved that my assumption, that Mark's selfishness had limits, was a foolish one. The truth is, I hadn't always been strong. In my 40s, I was worn thin by stress and the constant pressure of managing a man who believed his dreams mattered more than our reality. I stayed longer than I should have. I let his opinions carve valleys into my confidence. I lived in his shadow, believing it was safer than stepping into my own light. But leaving him taught me that shadows only exist when something blocks the sun. Reclaiming my independence at 59 wasn't easy, but it was the most courageous thing I've ever done. So when Officer Granger called, and Mark's name crawled its way back into my life like an unwelcome ghost, the woman who answered was not the timid wife he remembered. I was older, yes. But age hadn't softened me, it had sharpened me, clarified me. And when I walked into that meeting the next morning, I carried with me every lesson I'd learned in the years since our marriage ended. But nothing could have prepared me for the one document Officer Granger placed gently in front of me. A document that suggested Mark had done something far more calculated, and far more personal, than forging my name. Because on that paper, in bold letters, was something I never expected to see again. My signature. I'll admit it, when I saw that signature, my breath lodged in my throat. It was my name, written in handwriting that was close enough to mine to be unsettling, yet off in a way only I would recognize. The H looped too narrowly. The A slanted too much to the right. It was a forgery, but a deliberate one. And the sting of it didn't come from the fraud itself. It came from the familiarity. You see, Mark had always believed he understood me better than I understood myself. That was the foundation of our marriage. His certainty, my accommodation. He thought he could predict my thoughts, my reactions, even my handwriting. And for a long time he could. But the me he once shaped and shadowed was gone. Still, the betrayal cut deeper because of what was happening within my family, something I haven't mentioned yet. My daughter, Emily, had recently stopped speaking to me. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. She was 38, a mother of 2, and carrying a stress that she refused to share. The last time we talked, she said, "Mom, I just need space. Life is overwhelming right now." But space has a way of echoing. My son, Jordan, lived overseas with his partner. We spoke on holidays, birthdays, and sometimes at random hours when time zones aligned. But he wasn't here. And though he loved me, he couldn't step in and help if things got complicated. And then there was my sister, Marlene. A firecracker of a woman, 5 years younger and twice as loud. She lived 3 towns over, and though she'd race to my side if I called, I hadn't told her about the officer's call yet. I didn't want to worry her until I understood the situation myself. So yes, when I sat in that small fluorescent-lit room, looking at a forged version of my own name, the loneliness stung. Officer Granger noticed my silence. "Ms. Avery, we believe whoever submitted this application also attempted to pull credit under your identity last month. It was denied, but it appears to be part of a larger pattern." I swallowed. "And you think that person is my ex-husband?" "We're not making accusations at this point," he said carefully. "But the use of your former address is a significant indicator." I nodded. But in my chest, there was no doubt. Mark had always been irresponsible with money. During our marriage, he borrowed from his parents, from friends, from me. He took out credit cards in his name but expected me to pay them off. He made promises that evaporated like steam the moment they became inconvenient. When we divorced, I insisted on separating all accounts. It was the only firm stance I took. He resented me for it. "You'll regret this," he said the day he signed the papers. "You can't handle life alone. You need me more than I ever needed you." I remember standing there, numb, thinking how tragic it was that he believed control and love were the same thing. I left anyway. And now, years later, he had found one last way to try to control me, by pulling me into his financial disaster without my knowledge. But what Officer Granger said next made my stomach twist in a way no financial betrayal ever could. Ms. Avery. The forged signature isn't the only concerning part. There was a second applicant listed on the form. Someone he claimed was living at the residence with him. I frowned. Who? He slid a second document across the table. When I read the name, my heart stopped. Because the name listed beside Mark's was my daughter's, Emily Avery. I stared at the document, my daughter's name glaring up at me as though it had been waiting all along. Emily Avery. Not forged. Not misspelled. Typed neatly, deliberately, as though she had willingly been part of the application. But that wasn't possible. Emily had never lived with Mark after the divorce. In fact, she barely visited him. Their relationship had always been brittle. He tried to buy her affection when she was younger. Gifts, promises, grand gestures, but children see through artificial sweetness better than adults do. When she grew older, she learned to keep her distance. Which is why seeing her name on that form wasn't just confusing. It was terrifying. Officer Granger spoke gently, as though sensing the fracture inside me. We're looking into whether her employment records were used. Some parts match your daughter's real information. Have you spoken to her recently? My throat tightened. Not in a few weeks. I didn't yet tell him the truth, that Emily's recent silence had felt heavier than normal. That something in her voice the last time we spoke had sounded like a woman drowning quietly. He nodded. We'll need to contact her. I agreed, but my mind was racing. If Mark had used my name recklessly, that was one thing. But to drag Emily into this meant something more deliberate was happening, something calculated. When I left the station, I sat in my car for a long time. The autumn air was cool, the parking lot empty, the steering wheel firm beneath my hands. I dialed Emily twice. Both calls went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message at first. I was too afraid of the tremor in my voice. But on the third attempt I spoke. It's Mom. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me. I ended the call and sat still, listening to the ticking of my cooling engine. There are moments in life when the world seems to tilt just slightly off balance. Enough to tell you that something is shifting, but not enough to tell you how much will break when it lands. This was one of those moments. I thought of the house Mark still lived in. The house with the blue shutters, the 2 bedrooms upstairs, the kitchen he remodeled in our final year together. A house full of echoes and resentments. Then I thought of the financial documents from years back, the ones I'd discovered shortly before the divorce. Mark had hidden several unpaid loans from me. When confronted, he'd said, "It's under control, Helen. You worry too much." But debt doesn't disappear because someone is confident. And Mark's confidence had always been a mask stretched thin. When I finally drove home, I found an envelope taped to my front door. There was no return address. No handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My old electric bill. From the house I once shared with Mark. And on the back, in messy, angry scrawl, "Call me. Now." No name. But I knew who it was. I held the paper in trembling fingers. Because if Mark was leaving notes on my door, it meant he knew the investigation had begun. And if he knew that, then he also knew something else. I was coming for the truth. But when I called the number on the back of the bill, the voice that answered was not Mark's, and what they told me made my blood run cold. The voice on the other end was low, hesitant, and unmistakably young. "Mrs. Avery?" a woman asked. I blinked. "Who is this?" There was a pause, followed by a shaky exhale. "My name is Lila. I'm Mark's girlfriend." Girlfriend. Of course. There was always another woman orbiting Mark's chaos. But the tremor in her voice wasn't flirtation or bravado. It was fear. "I found that bill in the trash," she whispered. He was yelling last night. Something about you ruining everything. I don't know what's happening, but, please, don't tell him I called. My breath caught. Why would he be yelling about me? She hesitated again. Because of the loan. He said they flagged something. He said it was your fault they questioned him. And then, he said he had a plan to fix it. A cold prickle ran down my spine. What kind of plan? Silence. Then a flat, frightened whisper. He said he needed to clean up loose ends. I thanked her, ended the call, and immediately contacted a lawyer, a woman named Alyssa Merton, known for her sharp mind and calm demeanor. I sent her everything, the forged signature, the officer's notes, the loan documents, the note left on my door. Within 48 hours, she had assembled a clearer picture. Mark was drowning financially. Not just a little behind. Catastrophically behind. Thousands in unpaid credit card debt. A defaulted personal loan. A failing business venture he'd tried to hide. And then there were the applications. He'd been applying for mortgages, business loans, personal loans, anything he could put his hands on. Many had been denied. A few had slipped through initially but later collapsed due to verification issues. But the most alarming discovery was this. He had used my name, my former address, and portions of my daughter's information repeatedly, sometimes separately, sometimes together, as though trying different combinations until something stuck. Fraud by trial and error. But this wasn't just sloppy desperation. This was deliberate. Alyssa looked at me from across her polished desk. Helen, he's been attempting to build financial stability using identities he thinks he can control. Yours. Your daughter's. I swallowed hard. But why Emily? Alyssa tapped her pen thoughtfully. Because she's young enough to have a clean financial history, and old enough that credit agencies would take her seriously. It felt like someone had hollowed out my chest. I pulled out my phone and called Emily again. Voicemail. Then Jordan. He picked up on the second ring. After explaining everything, he fell silent. Mom, have you considered that Emily might be involved? The notion hit me like a slap. She'd never do something like this. Not willingly, he sighed. But if she's struggling financially. My heart twisted. I should have known. I should have seen. No, he said firmly. You taught us to survive. She just forgets she has you to lean on. That night, I sifted through old documents, marriage records, insurance files, old taxes, anything that could reveal whether Mark still had access to information he shouldn't. I found one. A binder he'd insisted on taking during the divorce. My important papers binder. Among the missing items were photocopies of my driver's license, my old signature forms, and, horrifyingly, Emily's college financial aid documents. He had kept them. He had kept everything. Alyssa filed an emergency identity theft alert and contacted the fraud unit. But she also warned me. If he's desperate, he may try to escalate. Don't be alone if you can avoid it. That sentence echoed in my mind long after I left her office. Because as much as I hoped this was simply financial fraud, I knew Mark's temper. His ego. His pride. And then, just after midnight, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. A photo. Of my daughter. Taken from a distance. Walking into her apartment, unaware of the camera. And below it, one sentence that made my entire body turn cold. She'll talk to me eventually. One way or another. I didn't sleep that night. My hands trembled as I stared at the photo of Emily, zooming in and out as though proximity could reveal the intention behind it. My daughter, oblivious, caught in the soft glow of the building's entry lights. There was no mistaking the implication. Mark wanted leverage. But what he didn't understand, what he had never understood, was that a mother's fear could harden into something far more powerful, resolve. By morning, I had packed a bag and driven straight to Emily's apartment. She answered the door with dark circles beneath her eyes and surprise etched across her face. Mom, what are you doing here? I didn't speak. I walked inside, locked the door, and showed her the picture. Her face drained of color. Is this real? Yes, I said quietly. And we don't have much time. I explained everything. The loan application, the forged signature, the investigation, the lawyer, the documents he'd stolen. At first she shook her head, refusing to believe her father capable of something so invasive. Then she whispered, "He asked me for my social security card last month." I froze. Why? He said he needed it for some tax thing. I didn't want to give it to him, so I told him I lost it. She swallowed. But, Mom, he already had it. He said he made a copy years ago, just in case. The room tilted. That was all the confirmation I needed. We went to the police station together to file her identity theft report. The officer assigned to her case was firm and professional, but the reality of what we were doing, formally accusing her father, settled into the air like cold smoke. On the way home, Emily cried quietly in the passenger seat. The kind of tears adults shed when reality cracks open and something childhood-shaped breaks inside. When we arrived at my townhouse, I made tea and sat across from her at the kitchen table. "Emily," I said softly, "we can't let him drag us down with him." She wiped her eyes. I kept thinking he wasn't okay, but I didn't know what to do. "You don't have to fix him," I whispered. "That was my mistake. For too many years." She nodded, staring at her hands. Then I told her the plan Alyssa had helped me prepare that morning. We would gather every piece of evidence. Every document, call, message, and inconsistency. We would build a timeline, a paper trail he couldn't escape. We would let the law, not anger, not emotion, trap him in the truth. Ethical revenge is quiet, methodical, inevitable. And this time, I would not flinch. Emily watched me as though seeing me clearly for the first time. "Mom, I didn't know you were this strong." I almost smiled. I didn't know either. Until I had to be. Together, we organized the documents across my dining table. Dates, accounts, addresses, forged signatures, suspicious withdrawals, email confirmations, screenshots of messages. Emily added her own evidence. Texts from Mark asking for information, voicemails laced with pressure. At sunset, Alyssa called with news that sharpened the room into focus. His loan application didn't just fail, Helen. It triggered a full audit. And investigators are now aware he used your identities. They're preparing to question him. Good. Very good. But before I could respond, my doorbell rang. Once. Twice. Slow. Heavy. My breath stilled. Because there was only one person who rang a doorbell like that, as though the world owed him attention. And when I looked through the peephole, Mark was standing on my porch, with a smile that promised he had no intention of leaving quietly. Mark smiled through the peephole, tight, performative, polished in a way that suggested he'd rehearsed it in the car. His eyes were sharp, scanning, predatory. The kind of smile he used when he wanted something and believed charm could soften the demand. I didn't open the door. Instead, I spoke through the locked frame. "You need to leave." He laughed. "Helen, come on. We need to talk. We have nothing to discuss." His tone sharpened. "Let me in." "No." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Emily was frozen behind me, her hands trembling. I raised a hand to quiet her. Then I lifted my phone, already recording. "Mark," I said calmly, "you should know that law enforcement is involved. And everything happening right now is being documented." The smile faltered. There it was, the crack in his confidence. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "You used my name. You used Emily's. You forged signatures, submitted fraudulent documents, and we have evidence. You need to leave." He exhaled sharply. "Helen, you don't understand. I'm under a lot of pressure. That loan was important. For you," I replied. "Not for us." Not at the cost of our identities. His jaw twitched. That old temper, simmering beneath the surface, hungry for release. Did your lawyer tell you to say that? He sneered. Or did you finally grow a backbone? I didn't answer. Silence is sometimes a more powerful weapon than words. And Mark had always needed an audience. Without one, his bravado crumbled. When I didn't respond, he snapped. You think you're better than me now? Living in your little townhouse? Pretending you're independent? You wouldn't last a year without me. I felt Emily stiffen behind me, but I stayed composed. That sentence, the same one he'd once thrown at me during our divorce, no longer had the power to wound, only to reveal. Mark, I said softly, the investigators will be contacting you. You should get a lawyer. For the first time, fear flickered in his expression. Real fear. He stepped back from the door. Whatever you think you're doing, Helen, stop. This won't end well for you. Then he turned and walked down my driveway, shoulders tight, pace fast, the facade of control slipping with every step. When he reached his car, a black sedan pulled up behind him. 2 plainclothes officers stepped out. Mark Ellison. He froze. Yes. We need to speak with you regarding multiple ongoing fraud investigations. His face drained of color. This is a misunderstanding. They didn't respond. One of them simply gestured toward their vehicle. As they guided him toward the sedan, Mark's eyes met mine through the window. Wide. Accusing. Disbelieving. As though the consequences he'd been outrunning for years had finally caught him, and he truly couldn't understand why. Emily exhaled, her voice trembling. Is that it? Is it over? No, I said softly. This is just the beginning. Because consequences aren't the end of a story. They're the echo. Mark would face charges, investigations, audits, legal repercussions for what he'd done. But the deepest consequences, the ones that reshape a life, don't come from the law. They come from truth. And truth was something he had never been able to outrun. But just when I believed the worst was behind us, Emily received a letter, one that revealed Mark had left behind a final piece of damage neither of us had expected. The letter arrived 3 days after Mark's arrest. Emily found it in her mailbox, handwritten in rushed, uneven strokes. She brought it to my home, her hands shaking as she placed it on the table. I haven't opened it, she whispered. I nodded. Together, we sat on opposite sides of the dining table, the same table that had been covered with evidence days earlier. The air felt thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath. I slid a knife under the envelope seal and gently pried it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, lined notebook paper, torn from the edge of a pad. I unfolded it. The writing was messy, angry, frantic. Emily, your mother is turning you against me. You need to know the truth. I used your name on the application because I was trying to help you. I was going to put you on the house title. You don't have to thank me now, but one day you will. There was no apology. No remorse. Just manipulation disguised as generosity. Emily's face twisted. He was going to put me on the house title? What does that even mean? I sighed. It means he was going to use your name to secure the loan, and then make you responsible for his debt. Her eyes welled. I don't understand how he could do this. I'm his daughter. I reached across the table and took her hands. Sweetheart, some people mistake love for ownership. When they lose control, they become dangerous. Not because they want to hurt you, but because they can't imagine a world where their needs don't come first. She swallowed. I keep thinking, if I had answered his calls sooner. This is not your fault, I interrupted gently. Your father made choices deliberately. You simply got caught in their path. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. We spent the afternoon sitting on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, the house quiet except for the occasional car passing outside. In the stillness, I realized something profound. For years, I had believed my silence, my calm endurance, had protected my children from Mark's volatility. But endurance isn't protection. Truth is. In the following days, everything moved quickly. Investigators uncovered a trail of forged applications, falsified documents, and attempted identity theft. Alyssa handled the legal responses with steel-spined professionalism. Emily secured her credit, froze her accounts, and began repairing the small damages: emails, forms, verifications. Mark's girlfriend, Lila, reached out once more. This time to say she had left him and filed her own report after discovering he had used her information too. Piece by piece, the truth surfaced. And piece by piece, the chaos he had built began to collapse. At night, I sometimes sat on the porch wrapped in a soft shawl, listening to the quiet my life had reclaimed. I felt grief, yes, and anger, and a sorrow for the years I had lost to a man who never deserved them. But beneath all of that was something far more powerful: relief, and the awareness that revenge, real ethical revenge, isn't about destroying someone. It's about refusing to be destroyed by them. By the time Mark's formal charges were filed, Emily was starting to laugh again. Small, fragile laughs, but real. She visited twice a week. We cooked together, talked, repaired what had quietly frayed between us. On a crisp autumn morning as we walked through the park, she slipped her hand into mine. "Mom," she said softly, "thank you for fighting back." And for the first time in years, I felt peace settle into the spaces Mark once occupied. But I still had one more chapter to close. Because when the court date finally arrived, I asked for a private meeting with Mark. And the last thing I told him was the one truth he had spent his entire life running from. The courthouse conference room was small, windowless, and undeniably cold. Mark sat at the far end of the table, wrists free but dignity unraveling. His lawyer kept glancing between us, but Alyssa reassured her this was simply a conversation, a final one. Mark looked older than I remembered. Not in the natural way people age, but in the way people unravel. His arrogance had faded into something like disbelief, maybe even confusion, as though he still couldn't accept that the world had stopped bending for him. "Helen," he said, his voice brittle, "I don't understand why you're doing this." For a moment, I simply studied him. The man I married at 30. The man who once made me laugh. The man who later made me small. "You used my name," I said quietly. "You used our daughters. You put her at risk. You put me at risk. And all because you believed you were entitled to whatever you wanted." He scoffed. "I was trying to build a future. You never believed in my plans." "No," I replied, calm and steady. "I believed in you. That was the problem. I gave you time, support, patience, things you mistook for weakness. And when I finally left, you told me I couldn't survive without you." He looked away. "But here's the truth," I continued, leaning slightly forward. "I didn't just survive. I rebuilt. I healed. I reclaimed a life you tried to control. And when you dragged me back into your chaos, I didn't collapse. I confronted it." He swallowed hard. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "You once told me," I said softly, "that you knew me better than I knew myself. But you were wrong." He finally met my eyes. "I know myself now," I said. "And you never did." The room fell silent. I stood, gathered my things, and nodded to Alyssa. The meeting was over. As I walked toward the door, I paused, just long enough to offer him one final truth. "You told me I couldn't survive without you. But the truth is, you couldn't survive without hurting me." Then I left him there, with his lawyer, his consequences, and the echo of a truth he had spent decades avoiding. Outside the courthouse, Emily waited for me on the steps. When she saw me, she smiled, not with relief, but with recognition. The smile of someone who finally understood the strength of the woman who raised her. We walked to the car together, the autumn sun warming our shoulders. Life didn't return to what it was before this ordeal. It became better. clearer, stronger. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, inevitable. And revenge, true, ethical revenge, isn't about punishing someone who wronged you. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to take. In the end, Mark didn't destroy my peace. He confirmed it. And if there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening to my story, it's this. Never underestimate the strength of a woman who has survived someone who told her she couldn't. She already knows the truth. And the truth is unstoppable. If this story kept you watching, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts in the comments.